There is a version of you that you have never met. Not because that person does not exist, but because you keep making the same choices that keep that person hidden. Think about that. There is a stronger version of you somewhere behind your excuses, a calmer version behind your anxiety, a disciplined version behind your procrastination, a confident version behind your fear, a focused version behind all the distractions you have allowed to occupy your mind. And perhaps the most painful truth is this. You already know what you need to do. You know the conversation you need to have. You know the habit you need to break. You know the work you need to begin. You know the skill you need to develop. You know the money you need to stop wasting. You know the hours you are losing. You know the person you could become. And yet you keep postponing the moment when you finally become serious about your own life. Let me ask you something. How long are you going to negotiate with the weaker version of yourself? How many mornings will you wake up knowing you should change and then return to the same behavior? How many opportunities will pass while you are waiting to feel ready? How many years can disappear while you keep telling yourself that one day things will be different? Because one day is not a date on the calendar. One day is a hiding place. It is where people put the dreams they are afraid to pursue. And maybe you have been living there. Maybe you have been saying, one day I will become disciplined. One day I will get serious. One day I will start that business. One day I will fix my finances. One day I will become confident. One day I will stop wasting time. But here's what nobody tells you. One day becomes 1 month. 1 month becomes 1 year. 1 year becomes 5 years. And eventually you wake up with something far more painful than failure. You wake up with evidence of what you could have become. I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from now. Don't rush past this. Close your eyes if you need to. Imagine that 5 years have passed. Your life has continued. The world has changed. Technology has changed. People around you have changed. Some people you know have moved forward. Some have become stronger. Some have built businesses. Some have learned skills. Some have become healthier. Some have repaired relationships. Some have become financially stable. And you? You are standing in exactly the same emotional place. Same excuses, same distractions, same fears, same habits, same promises, same tomorrow. How would that feel? Not for 5 seconds. Really feel it. Because sometimes the pain of an imagined future is powerful enough to awaken you from a comfortable present. Now, imagine something else. 5 years have passed. But this time, you decided that your mind would no longer control you. You stopped obeying every impulse. You stopped allowing every notification to interrupt your attention. You stopped treating temporary discomfort like an emergency. You began keeping promises to yourself. You worked when you did not feel like working. You studied when entertainment was easier. You saved when spending was tempting. You exercised when comfort was calling. You stayed silent when anger wanted a reaction. You continued when nobody applauded. You learned to sit alone without feeling abandoned. You learned to fail without calling yourself a failure. You learned to begin again without shame. And slowly, almost invisibly, your life changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, quickly, one decision at a time, one morning at a time, one refusal at a time, one disciplined action at a time. And one day you looked in the mirror and realized something. You were no longer trying to become that person. You had become that person. That is what we are talking about. Not perfection, not superiority, not being better than everyone else. Being better than the version of yourself that keeps betraying your potential. Because the 1% is not always about being extraordinary. Sometimes the 1% simply means being willing to do what the other 99% repeatedly refuse to do. Wake up when you said you would. Keep your word. Finish what you start. Control your attention. Control your emotions. Learn instead of complain. Build instead of consume. Delay pleasure instead of sacrificing your future for it. Take responsibility instead of searching for someone to blame. That sounds simple. But simple does not mean easy. And there is something deeper underneath all of this. You may think your biggest problem is discipline. It may not be. You may think your biggest problem is time. It may not be. You may think your biggest problem is motivation. It may not be. The deeper problem may be that you have trained your mind to expect comfort. And once the mind becomes addicted to comfort, growth begins to feel like danger. That is where the battle begins. Because your mind will often choose what feels good now over what will make you proud later. You know this. You have experienced it. You planned to work. Then your phone appeared. You planned to study. Then you told yourself you were tired. You planned to exercise. Then you promised yourself tomorrow would be better. You planned to save money. Then you rewarded yourself with something you did not need. You planned to speak with confidence. Then fear whispered, "What if they judge you?" And you listened. The problem was not that you did not know what to do. The problem was that you allowed a temporary feeling to make a permanent decision. Let that sink in. A temporary feeling made a permanent decision. That is how lives change direction. Not always through huge disasters. Sometimes through tiny moments. The moment you choose another hour of distraction. The moment you say, "I'll do it tomorrow." The moment you decide that discomfort means you should stop. The moment you let someone else's opinion become more important than your own values. The moment you allow anger to control your words. The moment you let fear decide which opportunity you will accept. Small moments, repeated, compounded, and eventually they become a life. There was a young man who had spent years believing he had a motivation problem. Every Sunday night, he would make promises to himself. This week will be different. He would write goals. He would watch motivational videos. He would buy notebooks. He would create schedules. Monday morning would begin with energy. By Wednesday, the energy was gone. By Friday, the plan was abandoned. Sunday night, guilt returned, and the cycle repeated for years. Then one evening, he sat alone after another week of unfinished promises. He looked at his notebook. Page after page was filled with goals. And suddenly he realized something that hurt. He wasn't failing because he lacked information. He was failing because he had become very good at negotiating with himself. Every time discomfort appeared, he negotiated. Just 10 more minutes. I deserve a break. I'll start when things calm down. I need to feel motivated. I'll do it when I'm ready. And eventually he understood. His mind had learned that his promises were optional. That was the real problem. So he stopped making dramatic promises. He made smaller ones, and then he kept them. He said he would wake at a certain time. He did. He said he would work for 30 minutes. He did. He said he would walk every day. He did. He said he would stop checking his phone during work. He did. Nothing looked impressive from the outside. But something extraordinary was happening inside. He was rebuilding trust with himself. And that is one of the most overlooked forms of personal power, self-trust. Confidence is not simply believing you are capable. Confidence is having evidence. Evidence that when you say you will do something, you do it. Evidence that when life becomes difficult, you do not immediately collapse. Evidence that when fear appears, you can continue. Evidence that when you fail, you can recover. Evidence that your emotions may speak loudly, but they do not get the final vote. This is how confidence is built, not by repeating, "I am confident." By giving yourself reasons to believe you can depend on yourself. Think about that the next time you make a promise to yourself. Because every promise you keep makes your identity stronger, and every promise you repeatedly break teaches your mind something too. It teaches your mind, my word does not matter. That is dangerous. Because eventually, you stop believing yourself. You say you will change, but you don't believe it. You set a goal, but somewhere inside, you already expect to quit. You begin something, but a part of you is already preparing the excuse. And then you wonder why confidence feels so far away. Confidence did not disappear. You trained yourself not to trust yourself, but if something was trained, something can be retrained. And that is where hope begins. Not with a fantasy. With a decision, you can retrain attention, you can retrain discipline, you can retrain your responses. You can retrain your relationship with discomfort, you can retrain the story you tell yourself, but first, you have to stop lying to yourself about what is happening. Because you cannot change a pattern you refuse to acknowledge. Maybe you are not too busy. Maybe you are distracted. Maybe you are not waiting for the right time. Maybe you are afraid. Maybe you are not resting. Maybe you are avoiding. Maybe you are not thinking about it. Maybe you are procrastinating. And there is no shame in admitting it. There is power in admitting it. The person who says, "This is where I am," can begin moving. The person who says, "This isn't my fault," may remain stuck. Responsibility is not punishment. Responsibility is power. Because if everything is someone else's fault, then someone else controls your future. But when you say, "I may not control what happened, but I control what I do next," you take your life back. You may not control where you started. You may not control the family you were born into. You may not control every rejection. You may not control every loss. You may not control what someone said about you. You may not control the opportunities you missed, but you can control your response. And your response is where your future begins. There is a difference between what happens to you and what you repeatedly do because of what happened to you. That difference can become your freedom. I know someone who lost an opportunity that he had spent years preparing for. It was not a small disappointment. It was devastating. He had expected that opportunity to change his life. When it disappeared, he spent months talking about it. He told everyone why it happened. He explained who was responsible. He replayed the unfairness. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps it had been unfair. But one evening, someone asked him a question. How long are you willing to keep paying for something that already happened? He became quiet because he realized he was still paying every morning. Every conversation, every decision, the event had happened once. But he was reliving it hundreds of times. That is another way the mind can imprison you. The past cannot always hurt you directly. Sometimes it hurts you through the meaning you continue giving it. You cannot rewrite what happened, but you can change what it means. Failure can mean, "I am finished," or it can mean, "I have information now." Rejection can mean, "I am not enough," or it can mean, "This door was not mine." A mistake can mean, "I am stupid," or it can mean, "Now I know what not to repeat." A difficult season can mean, "My life is falling apart," or it can mean, "My character is being built." The event matters, but interpretation matters too. And the mind that learns to interpret difficulty differently becomes extraordinarily difficult to defeat. Now, let me take you somewhere deeper. What if your greatest enemy is not failure? What if it is identity? Because people rarely behave consistently against the identity they believe about themselves. If you believe you are lazy, you will find evidence of laziness. If you believe you are weak, you will interpret difficulty as proof. If you believe you are unlucky, you will notice every disappointment. If you believe you cannot change, every setback becomes confirmation. But identity works both ways. If you begin seeing yourself as disciplined, you start asking a different question. Not, "Do I feel like doing this?" But, "What does a disciplined person do now?" If you see yourself as someone who keeps promises, you stop debating. If you see yourself as a learner, mistakes become lessons. If you see yourself as resilient, difficulty becomes part of the process. This is why changing your life is not merely about changing your schedule. It is about changing the person who follows the schedule You can give a person the perfect plan. If the identity remains unchanged, the old behavior eventually returns. That is why people sometimes lose weight and gain it back. They start businesses and abandon them. They make money and lose it. They create routines and destroy them. They change their circumstances without changing their internal identity. And eventually the old self pulls them backward. So perhaps the question is not, what should I do? Perhaps the deeper question is, who am I becoming through what I repeatedly do? Every action is a vote. Every time you choose discipline, you vote for a disciplined identity. Every time you choose courage, you vote for courage. Every time you choose patience, you vote for patience. Every time you choose learning over entertainment, you vote for growth. And every time you choose the opposite, you vote for the opposite. You do not build identity in one giant moment. You build it quietly. Nobody sees most of the votes. Nobody applauds the morning you stayed focused. Nobody celebrates the purchase you didn't make. Nobody sees the argument you could have started but didn't. Nobody knows you closed the app and returned to your work. Nobody sees the night you wanted to quit but continued. But your mind sees, and your mind keeps records. That is why private discipline eventually creates public confidence. You become strong in public because you practiced strength in private. You become calm in pressure because you practiced emotional control when nobody was watching. You become focused when opportunity arrives because you trained your attention when nothing exciting was happening. This is the invisible work, and the invisible work eventually becomes visible. Now, think about distraction. People often treat distraction as harmless. I'll just check this. I'll just watch one video. I'll just scroll for a few minutes. But distraction is not simply about time. It is about attention. And attention is one of the most valuable assets you possess. Where your attention goes repeatedly, your life follows. If your attention is constantly pulled toward outrage, comparison, entertainment, gossip, fear, and meaningless stimulation, what kind of mind are you building? A restless one, a reactive one, a mind that needs constant stimulation. And then you sit down to do meaningful work, and suddenly everything feels boring. The work did not become boring. Your brain became accustomed to novelty. That is why learning to focus may initially feel uncomfortable. You are not merely removing distractions. You are rebuilding your ability to stay with something long enough for depth to emerge. Most people never experience depth because they leave too early. They leave the book, they leave the business, they leave the skill, they leave the relationship, they leave the exercise program. They leave the difficult conversation. They leave the dream. Not always because it was wrong, sometimes because the initial excitement disappeared. But the absence of excitement does not mean the presence of failure. Sometimes it means you have entered the part where character is built. Anybody can work when inspired. The question is, what happens when inspiration leaves? Anybody can begin. Who can continue? Anybody can speak about goals. Who can tolerate the boring repetition required to achieve them? That is where the difference appears. A musician practices scales nobody wants to hear. An athlete repeats movements nobody sees. A writer writes pages that may never be published. A business owner solves problems before anyone notices success. A student studies chapters that feel difficult. A strong person does ordinary things consistently. That is one of the secrets nobody wants because it is not glamorous. Mastery is usually boring before it becomes beautiful. You repeat, you refine, you fail, you correct, you repeat again. And one day something that used to feel difficult becomes natural. That is the compound effect. You do not notice one repetition. You notice what thousands of repetitions have created. The same is true in the opposite direction. One excuse seems harmless. One wasted hour seems harmless. One unhealthy meal seems harmless. One emotional reaction seems harmless. One day of procrastination seems harmless, but repeated enough times, these things stop being events. They become patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. Identity influences decisions. Decisions shape your life. So be careful with the small things. Your future is hiding inside them. I want you to imagine your life 1 year from now, not your dream life, your actual life if nothing changes. Same phone habits, same sleep habits, same spending habits, same emotional reactions, same people, same excuses, same amount of effort, same avoidance. Where does that lead? Now change only one thing. Not everything, one thing. You become serious about your attention. You protect your mornings. You spend 1 hour every day learning a valuable skill. You exercise consistently. You stop spending money impulsively. You begin keeping promises to yourself. What happens after a year? You may not become unrecognizable overnight, but you become different. And then those changes begin affecting other areas. Your confidence increases because your discipline increases. Your discipline increases because your self-trust increases. Your self-trust increases because you keep promises. Your focus improves because you protect your attention. Your skills improve because you practice. Your income may eventually improve because your skills become valuable. Your relationships may improve because your emotional control improves. One change touches another. That is why you should never underestimate a small disciplined action. It may be carrying more future inside it than you can currently see. But there is another side. You cannot build a powerful life while continuously feeding a weak mind. And feeding the mind means more than what you watch. It means what you repeatedly tell yourself. Listen to the internal conversation. What do you say when you make a mistake? I knew I would fail. I can't do anything right. I'm behind. Everyone is better than me. It's too late. I don't have what it takes. Imagine saying those things to a child every day. What would happen? That child would eventually believe them. So why do you think you can say them to yourself endlessly without consequences? You need honesty, not cruelty. There is a difference. You can say, I made a mistake, without saying, I am a mistake. You can say, I need to improve, without saying, I am worthless. You can say, I am behind, without saying, my life is over. Language shapes attention. Attention shapes interpretation. Interpretation shapes behavior. Behavior shapes identity. And identity shapes destiny. That chain is more powerful than most people realize. Now let me ask you about fear. What would you do if you knew embarrassment could not hurt you? What would you attempt if rejection could not define you? What conversation would you have? What business would you start? What skill would you learn? What room would you walk into? What opportunity would you accept? Fear often does not say never. It says, not yet. It sounds reasonable. Wait until you know more. Wait until you have more money. Wait until you are more confident. Wait until people support you. Wait until the timing is perfect. But perfection is often fear wearing a sophisticated suit. There will almost always be something missing. More knowledge, more money, more confidence, more certainty, more approval. At some point, you have to move with incomplete information. Courage is not certainty. Courage is movement despite uncertainty. And courage grows through use. You do not become courageous and then act. Often you act. And courage grows afterward. Think about the first time you did something difficult. You were afraid. Then you survived. The next time, you were still afraid, but less surprised by the feeling. Then eventually you realized, I can feel fear and still move. That realization changes everything, because now fear loses its authority. It can sit in the passenger seat, but it does not drive. And there is another powerful discipline that people underestimate. Learning to delay emotional reaction. Someone insults you. You want to respond immediately. Pause. Someone rejects you. You want to give up. Pause. You receive bad news, you want to panic. Pause. You are angry. Pause. The ability to pause between stimulus and response is a form of freedom. Because if someone can control your emotions simply by pressing the right button, they have access to you. You don't have to become emotionless. You have to become emotionally responsible. Feel anger. But don't let anger write your message. Feel fear. But don't let fear choose your future. Feel sadness. But don't let sadness define your identity. Feel disappointment. But don't let disappointment become a permanent address. Your emotions are information. They are not always instructions. That distinction can save years of your life. Now, think about your environment. You can have strong intentions and weak surroundings. And weak surroundings will eventually test your intentions. If you are constantly surrounded by people who mock ambition, discipline will feel strange. If your phone is always within reach, distraction becomes automatic. If your room is chaotic, focus becomes harder. If your spending environment constantly encourages consumption, saving becomes difficult. If everyone around you complains, gratitude begins to feel unusual. You do not need to hate anyone, but you must understand influence. Environment quietly trains behavior. Sometimes changing your life requires changing what has access to your mind, not because you are better than others, because you are responsible for what you become. There is a difference between loving people and allowing every influence to shape you. You can care about someone without copying their habits. You can respect someone without following their path. You can forgive someone without giving them control over your future. And sometimes growth requires distance, not anger. Distanced, silence, boundaries, focus. There will be seasons when you cannot explain yourself to everybody. You will have to work quietly. You will have to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You will have to say no. And saying no can feel painful, but every yes has a cost. When you say yes to distraction, you say no to focus. When you say yes to unnecessary spending, you say no to financial freedom. When you say yes to every request, you may say no to your own priorities. When you say yes to comfort every day, you may say no to the stronger future you. Your life is built not only by what you choose, it is built by what you refuse. This is where the idea of the 1% becomes more serious. Being different is not about wearing a different shirt or saying different words. It is about developing standards. Standards for your attention, standards for your work, standards for your behavior, standards for how you speak to yourself, standards for what you tolerate, standards for what you repeatedly consume, standards for what you promise. Because motivation asks, what do I feel like doing? Standards ask, what is required? That is a completely different question. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking yourself how you feel. You know the alarm rings. Get up. You know the work matters. Do it. You know the money needs to be saved. Save it. You know the conversation needs to happen. Have it. You know the habit is destroying your focus. Yes. Remember the trigger. You know the skill will take years. Begin. Not because you feel ready, because you decided. This does not mean becoming harsh with yourself. It means becoming honest with yourself. There will be days when you genuinely need rest. Rest is not weakness. There will be days when you need to slow down. Slowing down is not failure. There will be seasons when survival itself is the achievement. But there is a difference between recovery and avoidance. Learn the difference. Because the mind loves disguises. Avoidance can look like planning. Fear can look like research. Procrastination can look like preparation. Distraction can look like relaxation. Perfectionism can look like high standards. You have to become psychologically honest enough to ask, what am I really doing here? Not what story am I telling? What am I really doing? That question can expose you, and it can free you. Now imagine meeting your future self, not the fantasy version, The honest version. Imagine yourself 10 years from now sitting across from you. That person knows everything you are doing today. Every hour wasted, every promise kept, every promise broken, every opportunity ignored, every time you chose courage, every time you chose comfort. And that future person asks you, what did you do with the years I gave you? What would you say? Would you explain? Would you blame circumstances? Would you talk about how difficult things were? Maybe they were difficult. But what did you do with what you had? That question is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create awareness, because time is strange. When you are young, a year feels enormous. Then suddenly you look back and realize entire years disappeared. And the tragedy is not simply that time passes. The tragedy is that you can be present while your life passes. You can be physically alive and psychologically asleep. Wake up. Look at your habits. Look at your calendar. Look at your bank account. Look at your body. Look at your relationships. Look at your attention. They are telling you what you actually value, not what you say you value. Your schedule reveals your priorities. Your spending reveals your priorities. Your attention reveals your priorities. Your habits reveal your priorities. And sometimes the life you have is simply an honest reflection of the choices you have repeated. That is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Because if your choices helped create this reality, new choices can begin creating another, not instantly. But gradually, the same compound effect that built the problem can build the solution. If small distractions created weakness, small acts of focus can create strength. If small excuses created procrastination, small acts of completion can create discipline. If small compromises damage self-respect, small acts of integrity can rebuild it. If repeated fear narrowed your life, repeated courage can expand it. You don't have to repair your entire life tonight. You have to stop making it worse and then begin making it better. One decision, then another, then another. There will be no dramatic music in real life. No audience will stand up when you finally decide to become disciplined. Nobody may know. You will simply wake up tomorrow and face ordinary choices. That is where transformation happens. Not in the speech, not in the notebook, not in the announcement. In the ordinary choice, the alarm, the phone, the meal, the task, the conversation, the purchase, the thought, the response, the decision, again and again and again. This is why mastery of the mind is not some mystical achievement. It is the repeated practice of choosing consciously instead of automatically. Your old life runs on autopilot. Your new life requires awareness. Catch yourself. Notice the impulse. Notice the excuse. Notice the emotional reaction. Notice the story. Then choose. That pause is where transformation lives. Now let's talk about sacrifice, because everyone wants the reward. Few people want the trade. You want freedom. What are you willing to give up? You want wealth. What are you willing to delay? You want mastery. What entertainment are you willing to sacrifice? You want confidence. What uncomfortable situations are you willing to enter? You want peace. What arguments are you willing to stop participating in? You want a stronger body. What comfort are you willing to surrender? Every result has a price. And the price is often paid before the reward becomes visible. That is why people quit. They pay the price, but cannot yet see the result. Imagine planting a tree. You water it. Nothing happens. You water it again. Nothing happens. Weeks pass. Still nothing. A person who only trusts visible results will stop. But beneath the soil, something is happening. Roots are forming. That is how personal growth works. For a long time, your discipline may produce little visible evidence. You study. Nothing changes. You save. Nothing feels different. You exercise. The mirror barely changes. You practice. Nobody notices. You control your emotions. Nobody applauds. But roots are forming. Then eventually the external world catches up with the internal work. People call it sudden success. They did not see the years underground. Do not confuse invisibility with uselessness. Some of the most important work you will ever do will look insignificant while you are doing it. And that is why patience is part of mastery. You cannot force a compound effect to reveal itself on your preferred schedule. You can only keep contributing. There was a woman who spent years rebuilding her financial life after making serious mistakes. At first, her progress was almost embarrassing. She could only save a small amount. Her friends were buying things she could not afford. She felt behind, but she continued. She learned. She tracked her spending. She stopped using purchases as emotional rewards. She developed skills. She increased her income. She saved more. She invested carefully. Years later, people asked how she became financially secure. They saw the result. They did not see the hundreds of small decisions that created it. And she said something worth remembering. The hardest part wasn't making money. The hardest part was becoming the person who could keep it. That's the deeper level. Your external goal may require an internal identity. You don't simply need more money. You may need more financial discipline. You don't simply need more opportunities. You may need the courage to recognize and act on them. You don't simply need more time. You may need fewer distractions. You don't simply need confidence. You may need evidence. You don't simply need motivation. You may need standards. You don't simply need a better life. You may need to become capable of sustaining a better life. That is why the inner work matters. Because sometimes people receive what they asked for and lose it because they did not become ready to carry it. Success without character can become another form of failure. Money without discipline disappears. Attention without wisdom becomes distraction. Power without self-control becomes destruction. Opportunity without preparation becomes regret. So master yourself before demanding more from life. Because whatever you cannot manage will eventually manage you. If you cannot manage money, money will manage your emotions. If you cannot manage attention, your phone will manage your day. If you cannot manage anger, other people can control you by provoking you. If you cannot manage appetite, temporary pleasure can control your health. If you cannot manage fear, fear can control your opportunities. If you cannot manage time, urgency will control your priorities. Mastery begins with management of self. And self-management begins with awareness. Now let me ask you something difficult. What if nobody is coming? Not to save you, not to organize your life, not to give you discipline, not to rescue your dream, not to force you to become the person you know you can become. What if nobody is coming? That sounds frightening, but it can also be freeing, because if nobody is coming, then you stop waiting. You stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop waiting for somebody to believe in you before you believe in yourself. You begin, maybe slowly, maybe imperfectly, but you begin. And when you begin, you discover something. You were never as powerless as you thought. You may not control everything, but you control enough to change the direction. A ship does not need to turn 90 degrees instantly to reach a new destination. Sometimes a small adjustment in direction is enough. Your life works the same way. A small change today can create a completely different destination years from now. This is why the question is not, can I transform my entire life today? The question is, can I make one decision today that my future self will be grateful for? Then tomorrow another, then another. This is how people become different quickly. Now think about regret. Failure hurts, but regret has a different kind of pain. Failure says, I tried and it didn't work. Regret says, I never tried. Failure can teach you. Regret often haunts you with imagination. What if I had started? What if I had stayed? What if I had spoken? What if I had applied? What if I had practiced? What if I had believed? And perhaps the cruelest question is, What if I had simply given myself a chance? Do not build a life where your future self spends years answering that question. You are going to fail at something. You will be rejected. You will make mistakes. Someone will misunderstand you. A plan will collapse. A door will close. You will have bad days. You will doubt yourself. That is part of being alive. But there is a pain that is often worth choosing. The pain of effort, the pain of discipline, the pain of learning, the pain of uncertainty, the pain of starting over, because those pains can produce growth. The pain of